So the Battle of Utapau represented the last battle of the Clone Wars for the 212th Attack Battalion, and while we've discussed what the 212th was doing during the conflict, now let's take a look at the 212th after the war. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the 212th famously during the war served under General Kenobi, being his primary fighting force throughout the entirety of the conflict. They were seen fighting in battles from the Battle of Christophsis all the way up to the Battle of Utapau at the very end of the conflict, but like many elements of the Grand Army of the Republic, they didn't just disappear with Order 66, they stuck around, and the 212th actually has a fairly significant amount of history in the immediate aftermath of the war. So let's discuss exactly what the 212th was up to after the end of the Clone Wars. And we're going to pick up basically right where the Battle of Utapau leaves off. During the Battle of Utapau, when Order 66 is declared by the Office of the Supreme Chancellor, the clone troopers turn on the Jedi, but they also turn on many local forces fighting alongside them in battles across the galaxy. This is mostly due to the fact that a lot of these local forces would rush to the aid of the Jedi, but in Utapau's case, it's a little bit different. The Empire immediately saw the Utapauan resistance forces that were fighting alongside the clones as a threat to the coming Imperial regime, and decided to instead try to snuff them out while they sort of had a bit of an advantage. So Republic forces mid-battle turned on the local militia forces fighting on Utapau. This resulted in many arrests, including the arrests of many government officials on Utapau, including the harbor master that met Obi-Wan when he first landed on the planet. This would be the 212th's first mission following Order 66, would simply be to subjugate the people of Utapau and make them more susceptible to an Imperial occupation. However, in the days following Order 66, and as the Clone Wars drew to their anticlimactic end as the droids started to shut down, the priorities changed a little bit, and there were more pressing matters elsewhere in the galaxy that the 212th had to attend to. Following the end of the Battle of Kashyyyk, Republic forces turned on the Wookiees, and that began a process that would become known as the Pacification of Kashyyyk, where Imperial forces moved to subjugate the world and prevent a Wookiee uprising. And the 212th was quickly swept up in that ordeal, being pulled off of Utapau and transferred to Kashyyyk to carry out a large campaign against Wookiee resistance forces there. That would be their first major task, working alongside the clone troopers already on Kashyyyk. The 212th and Kashyyyk would actually become a pretty common sort of pair throughout the early days of the Empire. The 212th would become a prominent force on Kashyyyk, and ultimately, as Kashyyyk fell under Imperial control and became a sort of world that was under the stranglehold of not just the Empire, but the Trandoshans as well, the 212th would remain stationed on Kashyyyk, even as they transitioned from being a clone force to being a stormtrooper force. During this time, by the way, Commander Cody, who was in charge of the 212th during the Clone Wars, would desert and basically disappear from the ranks of that unit for good. And for the record, his desertion was due to his objections with the way the Empire treated native forces like the Wookiees or the Utapauans. With Cody's departure, the 212th was put under the command of General Kada, who would lead the 212th throughout much of their remaining history, at least that we know of so far. He would become the commander of clone forces and later stormtrooper forces operating on Kashyyyk, and he would still be managing the 212th when they had to face off against Saw Gerrera's partisans in the early days of the Empire, as the partisans made their way to Kashyyyk. That's right, when you're fighting stormtroopers on Kashyyyk in Jedi Fallen Order, you're actually fighting members of the 212th. Now, they aren't the clones we saw during the Clone Wars. By this point, the 212th, like many other Imperial units, had transitioned from clone forces to a recruit force, and while there may have been a handful of clones still active within their ranks, they were not the majority, and they were a pretty rare sight by this point in the reign of the Empire. Now, we know that the Empire would use the 212th's campaign on Kashyyyk for propaganda purposes, putting it on a pedestal as an example of Imperial triumph against adversity and against the sort of scourge of the galaxy, as the Empire would refer to them. And that's basically where the 212th story ends. Imperial propaganda reports about their glorious victories on Kashyyyk and the ongoing occupation of the Wookiee homeworld. It's kind of interesting that they ended up being far more associated with Kashyyyk after the war than the forces that were fighting on Kashyyyk when the war finally came to an end. And what about the 212th's relationship with the 501st? Well, Unfortunately, that doesn't continue after the end of the war. The fighting relationship between the 501st and the 212th was mainly due to the connection between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, two Jedi leaders who were, well, they had a strong past together, as many people would be aware of, and as a result, their clone units regularly worked closely together. And while the 501st would stay under the command of Darth Vader, who was formerly Anakin Skywalker, the 212th soon had no connections with General Kenobi, and would become a completely sort of separate unit that likely would have caused Anakin emotional pain to see those forces. So it's likely that the 501st and the 212th never worked together after the end of the war. In fact, we don't have any hard evidence to say that they ever came in contact following the declaration of Order 66. And that brings an end to the long, triumphant, heroic, and sad legacy of the 212th, one of the most prominent units fighting in the Clone Wars that had ultimately fallen to just another stormtrooper garrison by the midpoint of the reign of the Empire. If you'd like to learn about what the 212th was like during the conflict in their heyday when they were serving under General Kenobi, I'll leave a link up here to my video about the 212th during the Clone Wars. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think the Empire allowed the 212th to celebrate its heritage. After all, they have a long history stretching all the way back to the Battle of Christophsis. Do you think the stormtroopers were really able to celebrate the heritage of their unit, or do you think it was simply just a number given to them, and at this point in the reign of the Empire, it meant nothing to them? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.